All right, everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We are excited to be with you. We're doing our encore of the presentation that we gave just a couple weeks ago at S&PS Amplify. You'll see the Amplify logo there. If you're not familiar with Amplify AEC, it is the S&PS annual conference, and Rohan and I had the privilege of presenting this presentation there. So we had a number of requests for folks that didn't make it. So we're happy to provide that for you today. Um, just a couple housekeeping things. We're recording today's webinar, so you will get the full recording. We will also certainly be having some Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions along the way, go ahead and enter them in the chat bot, and we will respond to that at the end of the presentation when we get to the Q&A. With that, we're going to jump right in. We got a lot to cover today, but again, thank you for joining us for this Measure Twice, Market Once, how AEC firms can maximize insights to win more work. I want to just start with introducing myself. I'm Tim Asimos. I'm head of growth at Client Savvy. I've had the privilege of being in and around the AEC industry now for the better part of my career, going on 20 years. In fact, next year will be 20 years I have been in the AEC industry. Time goes fast when you're having fun. But yeah, I'm excited to be here with my co-presenter, Rohan. Rohan, why don't you jump in and introduce yourself?
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Rohan Jawali, founder and CEO at Joist AI. I haven't been long as Tim has been in the industry. I've been there for like about 16, 17 years. But like Tim mentioned, when you're having fun, the time passes really fast. A quick background on me. I'm a civil engineer by degree, went to Texas A&M and started Joist in 2022 after essentially leaving my previous job at Hinsufos, a national GC here in San Diego, where I worked over a decade in all the positions across marketing, proposals, operations, and so on, which gave me a lot of insight into how industry works. I was super heavy into data from day one, and I'm super excited to go dive deep into the concept of data and how it's useful in AI and as we go navigate in the future. Super excited to be here. Back to you, Tim.
All right. So let's talk about this is kind of what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with the why. Why the rising role of insights in AEC marketing. What does that mean? What are insights versus data? What is the purpose behind it? Why is it something you should be even thinking about or focused on? We're going to talk about, the what. So harnessing data throughout the client journey. I think we're hoping to connect some dots for you today so that you think about maybe a lot of different data points that are sources of insights that you can leverage to ultimately, be more persuasive in proposals, to do more things with your business development, basically to maximize your work by being able to look at data that you can gather across the client journey. And then we're going to talk through some use cases and talk about, how you can leverage technology really to turn those data into actionable insights. That is the goal. And obviously, Rohan and I both represent software companies. So we're going to be sharing some ways that we help. We're also going to share some ways that you can maximize insights, outside of the platforms that we represent. So with that, let's jump in to the why. So why are insights so important? Rohan, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like, it's all about data that drives the insight at the end of the day. And as we're, as AEC, if you think about it, we actually sit on a gold mine of data in general. And if we can start drawing insights from the data, we can essentially take a whole different level of approach as we go through winning work, building relationships with our client, and executing projects and building that end-to-end amazing customer experience for our clients that means and matters for a lot because at the end of the day it's a relationship based industry, right? We want to make sure that we're actually on point when it comes to our strategy to continue building up that relationship and continue winning work and have repeat customers in the grand scheme of things. So from insight perspective, I mean, think about it. Like, why are insights important? Let's use an example of proposal process. If you have a solid insight, solid data set on a particular client, the proposal process can go much more smoother in a grand scheme of things. For example, like, hey, you know what? Our VP of engineering talked to this particular client a month ago. That insight, that data set you already have in the process. That persona is this, that they're looking to make a decision based on these things apart from the RFP. You have that insight. You can start bringing that insight into the pursuit process and start executing from multiple factors, multiple dimensions. You can make decisions faster. You can essentially, back your messaging strategy based on the insight you have. You can essentially, have your entire, pursuit document geared around the insight that you have. I mean, that's just one example of how insight can change what we do on the ground and how the outcomes can change in the grand scheme of things. And that's just like I said, one example. There's a lot of examples, a lot of different data sets that we can pull in and start driving those outcomes in a favorable manner for us. And that's why I feel insights are super important as we go.
Yeah, so that's a good segue. So I think another way that's helpful as you think about data, data is not the end goal. It's really only the place that you start. So I want to show you the data pyramid. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but I think it's helpful to illustrate my point. See down there at the bottom are data is data, raw and unstructured facts in the form of numbers and words, information that you have. It's collected there. It's just that's it. It's the most basic level. Moving up in information, that's when you're taking data and you're now processing it, you're now organizing it. It's not just sort of out there. I think a lot of AEC marketing teams, unfortunately, a lot of their data dwells in that red zone of it's just fractured, it's everywhere, it's not connected, it's not organized, you're not even at the information level. But I know that some firms have started to organize their data, but they're still stuck with just information, which information's not the goal either. You get to insights when you take that information, you analyze that information, and then you can draw conclusions based around that information. Ultimately, with the goal of taking the insight and it creates an action. We're going to do something based upon these insights. We're going to add this insight into our proposal in order for us to better align with the needs of the client as stated in the RFP, or even as Rohan pointed out, that offline conversation that we had with someone, a stakeholder on that decision-making team that shared something that isn't stated in the RFP. Obviously, firms always want to get an inside track, but where is that kind of information stored? Where is it documented? We're going to get into things today like past performance that you can leverage as an indicator of future performance, things like that. Those are insights that are actionable and that ultimately lead you to basically creating a competitive advantage. I think that when the market is so crowded, being sort of data informed really helps you make faster decisions, smarter decisions, and really more strategic, more intentional ways of doing marketing and business development. Ultimately, when you can leverage insights to your advantage. So maybe pull out your phone real quick. We would love to throw up a poll and just see maybe where the folks on the audience in the audience today stand. Think about how many of your firm's recent pursuits were driven by things like historical success data, or are these just hunches? Is this just leaders and project managers and principals just going based around their own gut feel? So if you could just take out your phone for just a minute and we will pull up to see where we stand, and we'll give a couple minutes while you enter in your information here and we'll see where we land. Yeah, so it looks like not surprising, which is why Rohan and I actually thought of this presentation. The majority, 56%, try to use data, but ultimately that gut instinct really drives the decisions that you're making. We've got 3% never use it, 20% rarely use it, and then 22%, 23% now. You are in the upper echelon. So kudos to you if that is your firm, consistently using past success data to guide pursuit. So the goal of this is that you want to move from away from those gut instincts. I mean, I'm not telling you to ignore intuition nor your gut feel, but it should be yes and. It should be data and insights that you can then also bring in your own sort of intuition to the equation versus just relying solely around that. And ultimately, I think this helps your firm invest in the things that are going to drive the most value. It could be that this affects your go no go process. We have a client, a very large engineering client, that has found that if they have one non-promoter in the net promoter system, the scale of 0 to 10, 9 and 10s are the ones highly likely to recommend your firm. Those are promoters. If they have one person in a client organization who is not a promoter, their capture rate is 31% lower than it is if they're all promoters. That's the kind of data that you can collect, that you can then draw insights from, and that then you can apply to things like your go no go decisions. But we're not just talking about proposals. I mean, it could be the things that you do with your website, the things that you're doing with video, with social media. Are you really looking at the data to draw out insights, or are you just sort of, oh, that's interesting, right? What's your approach when you're looking at the data? Are you trying to look at the stories behind the numbers in order to do things better and to get the best ROI out of your efforts? Or are you sort of just resting on, where the priority is coming based around sort of the opinions of those on your team, as well as obviously you've got the opinions of principals as well. I think ultimately insights that are drawn from data, it doesn't just make you better at the tactical, it makes you better at the strategic, right? Like, should we pursue this client? Should we pursue this market? How should we redesign our website? Those are the kinds of things that insights can really help with an overall strategy, but also it can get into the nitty-gritty of like, what's the best day of the week to send out your email, or how many hashtags should you include in your LinkedIn post to get the most engagement? That's where insights can be helpful ultimately for making your marketing, your business development better. And I think also, insights are where you get buy-in for support. I think a lot of marketers fail to get buy-in for their ideas when they don't connect the dots to the bottom line, but also when they don't have data and insights to support why they are recommending this. If someone marketing manager that manages proposals, when that firm leader comes to you with a last minute go decision, do you have insights to support why the firm should not sort of have to go through a pretty crazy 48 hours to get the proposal out the door? Or is it just, oh, my staff is they're slammed, we don't have time, and it's going to be really stressful. Like, that's not a reason that's compelling. But when you have data and insights that speaks to, the probability of winning that work, how that could negatively impact other work, those are the kinds of insights that give like a lot of credibility to the buy-in and support and alignment that you ultimately need to get with firm leadership. And we all know in the AC industry, marketing is always having to somewhat provide the why behind the work that we do. Simply because by nature we're working with engineers and architects, construction managers. We're working with people that are not marketers, or business developers naturally, or even by their education and experience. Therefore, It's our job to connect those dots, and I think insights can be a very powerful tool for you to have to get the buy-in that you need. All right. So, Rohan, why don't you talk to us about the what? How can firms harness data across the client journey? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, Tim, you talked a ton about different examples of the journey, right? The journey is very important, in this conversation, in my opinion. And we all know about like account-based marketing. And if you think about our industry, it's essentially an account-based experience. We are executing multiple projects with the same client in parallel in different timelines, if you think about it. And they're all going through a buying journey with us, right? The journey happens in multiple ways, multiple processes. So if you think about activities that are involved in the buying journey, the customer journey from start to finish, there are a lot of different conversations that are happening, data points that we're collecting, things that we have from a strategic perspective that are happening with boots on the ground with different roles in the company. Like one thing that one of my mentor used to say back in time is every single role in our industry, every single person that's working in an AEC firm is sales person. He's selling. We're all selling day in, day out, being on the project, working in the marketing or doing whatever. Everything is client facing for us. And Tim talked about website. It's a really good example of how we can optimize the data collection in a grand scheme of things. A lot of firms essentially can track the website visitors and analytics around who's visiting our website, what regions people are visiting the websites from, what are the personas of people visiting our websites as well. If you have a client that you're trying to break into, like let's say a private data center client or real estate giant that you're trying to get in with, if they're visiting your website and reading certain articles on the website, visiting certain people's profiles, you know that hey, this is what exactly that they're looking for. Take that insight and then bundle that up with the next conversation you're going. That's just another example of how you can use that data. Now, if you think about social media and other forms of marketing that we're doing, like email marketing, are they interacting with our post? Are they actually opening our emails? Like, what? How are we collecting that data? That data exists, right? But if you're not collecting and attributing that data back to that client's profile in your system of record, then you're actually missing a lot of insight that you can drive from the data you're collecting. We talked about websites. We talked about submitting proposals to them. Are we getting feedback from them when we submit the proposal? Are we documenting that feedback back into the system for feedbacks and then essentially using that next time so we can actually make better decisions for the better outcomes in general. And again, that's just the pre-positioning phase and the proposal phase. If you think about it, the RFP and RFQ and evaluation process, there's a whole lot of activity that's happening in the execution phase of the project, right? In my mind, it's like a circle. We are going through the pursuit process. We are closing the projects. We are winning the project. We are executing the project. We are closing out the project again, and we are going after more projects. So if you can build a solid loop around like collecting data, bringing the data back into one place that you can actually leverage and drive insight, how amazing that would be, right? And that's where I think something that I learned after starting Joist AI is a completely different perspective towards the client journey, the account-based experience that I never had while working in the AEC. And I think it's something that's becoming more apparent to me that our industry needs to start adopting what the account, like the experience for a client is, and then how we essentially different phases we're collecting insights and data and feedback from the client and attributing that back to the front lines when we're trying to go win more work with them. That's actually the best strategy that we can do is retain our customers and essentially get more work with them. Then you don't have to essentially spend more time, spending more resources and money to win more projects with different new customers. Because again, getting new customers is expensive. Retaining the customers and getting more work from them is actually the cheapest way to grow in my mind.
Yeah, and before we move on, Rohan, I'll just add, a lot of firms look at repeat business as their key metric, and they can say, "Oh, we have 90% repeat business, really high repeat business," and that's great. But what repeat business doesn't capture is, are you continuing to grow and capture more or all of that client's spend in whatever they're spending, if it's construction or architecture, engineering, or are you continuing to get more work from that client, but over time, their spend with your firm is dwindling down to eventually you don't get the next project. There are firms that are on top of that, and there's other firms that are not capturing what is our share of spend with that client. Are we continuing to grow that account, or is our account actually are we losing ground? And so that's kind of where those insights can be really helpful as well when you start to get into things like account management and client management, really kind of looking beyond the typical KPIs that firms are tracking.
And on that note, Tim, that's net revenue retention, right? In a good, a firm will always have net revenue retention over 100%. So you're always basically indicating that you're, winning more work with that particular client. Solid point. Thank you. So let's take a step back from data perspective, because once you have a good data set, that's when you can start driving better insights. And a few years ago, we did a quick R&D project around like, okay, we have data, but what kind of data do we have? So we did like a multiple projects, case studies ourselves, and then what we found was a typical project or AEC firm has anywhere from 80 to 85% of their data essentially unstructured. And what I mean by that is, documents and Excel files and drawings and specs, the PDFs, the Words, CAD files, and the Revits. We have all sorts of format just sitting on our servers, right? And there is a lot of insight that's actually locked into those files. And then there is a side of structured data set that lives into systems of records, like, a client Savvy has a lot of data. Deltex and CRMs and ERPs have a lot of structured data set that exist. And for us to be really successful in driving insight, where I feel where we are heading towards is we're going to be at the intersection of unstructured and structured in a grand scheme of things. You need to drive the data point, like bring the data points from your unstructured data sets, like files and folders, and then bring the insights or data sets from your structured data sets, and then essentially merge that in one place to drive the better insights for us. So now you have actually complete, 360-degree view on making decisions for certain things. So if you think about like the same concept, a lot of work that we do on a day-to-day basis actually does not get documented anywhere, like emails, for example, like I said, files and folders. Our work actually happens in unstructured format. And that's what basically becomes the biggest challenge for firms to essentially drive insights. Because if you don't have a good structure, good system for, saving files, for example, and the files are never brought to the context, then what's the point, right? And as we're going into the AI world, the word context is becoming even more important because, yes, you have all this data sitting here, but you have a powerful brain that's sitting here. And if they're both not talking to each other, then you can't really do much. And that's something, it's a very fascinating concept if you think about it, like how is our data structured and what we can drive from that. If you take a step back and just think about your firm and think about where do we have everything just sitting and are we actually do we have visibility into that, that will essentially start the conversation at a really good spot as you move forward towards insights. And again, I always like Tim's pyramid is spot on. The bottom layer of data is actually far more wider and longer because there is so much, like it's a gold mine that we are sitting on in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and I'll add too, and those of you on the webinar today, this may be true in your firm, but so many firms, the CRM data is not even remotely capturing the data. I was just talking to a firm yesterday, and they told me, their most senior, most seasoned business developer literally does not enter a single thing into the CRM, right? They happen to use Deltek Vantage Point. Not a single thing ever gets added into. So, what's beyond that is like all of this information is stored in different places. You've got your project profiles are on the server, and you've got photos over here, and you've got, hey, remember that time we wrote that description up for that one proposal and no one happens to know where it is. These are the kinds of things we're talking about. Just a real fractured amount of data. And to Rohan's point, there's a gold mine of insights living in that. It's just most firms don't have it organized and structured and integrated in such a way that you're able to actually leverage. Well, you can't find the insights to begin with, and then you definitely can't leverage them for things like pursuit qualification and strategy.
Absolutely. And to Tim's point, like let's assume you received a solid feedback from a client after the product closeout, like, hey, your team did phenomenal. And I loved everything like working with your team. But you know what? I didn't feel like the importance, like emphasis was given towards schedule. Let's say you heard that feedback and you never documented that. It exists in the air somewhere, but nobody, probably somebody's brain. But if it's not quantified somewhere or it's not documented, so when you're going up to the next project with the same client, yes, you can do win-loss analysis with the client, understand the net revenue retentions and other metrics that you have in place, make a no-go decision based on the win ratios from the past and so on. And let's say you're going into the pursuit process, right? If you don't address that particular feedback that you heard in the past in the pursuit process, like, hey, we heard your feedback and this is what we plan on doing on this project to improve your experience around schedule, we are defeating the purpose because they have expressed the concern around certain points and we're not communicating that. So that's the gist of it, right? If you have a good set of information organized in one place that you can keep on leveraging again, that's basically the intent. You can drive more outcomes for that particular client, particular business group in a grand scheme of things. Again, another example as we go through the motions of example. Um, Back to you, Tim.
Yeah, so some of you, maybe all of you know that Client Savvy, next week we're launching a client experience in the AEC industry research study with the S&PS Foundation. In that study, we found that just around 20% of the industry captures structured client feedback that's project based. And what I mean by that, that isn't like your PMs talk to people after the project. There is a survey, there is an interview, there is something tangible that's collected and documented as it relates to client feedback. So, 80% of the industry can't benefit from this, but the 20% that do, there's a gold mine of insights based on past project performance and client sentiment data that you can leverage to understand, do we have the right project manager for this team? Well, what's the client sentiment scores been on the last project with this client where we use this project manager? Maybe there were some challenges. If you're not measuring that, if you're not asking for structured feedback, you may not know that there were challenges. Maybe their communication wasn't great, and maybe communication is a very essential priority for this particular selection team. So you'll want to pick a project manager where they have incredibly high sentiment with clients related to communication, and then you can actually demonstrate that by actually showing what their recent feedback has been, what their scores have been, maybe what their net promoter score is, maybe some quotes from actual client surveys. These are the things that we're talking about. As I mentioned earlier, past performance becomes an indicator of future performance. And when performance, a lot of firms hear the word performance and they think of things like on time, on budget, or we solved the engineering challenge, or the client thought that the building was beautiful. That's not what we mean by performance. We mean things like that clients care about in addition to the table stakes: communication, collaboration, where your invoice is easy to understand, or were they a major headache, right? Those are the things that increasingly folks are actually looking at when they're selecting an AEC partner. They're looking beyond just, can they build a good building? Can they have a safe job site? Can they deliver on time, on budget? The answer is yes, every single one of your peers can do that. It now becomes more around, what's it going to actually be like to work with these firms? And that's where your insights from past project feedback and sentiment can actually be a huge competitive advantage for you to demonstrate that in ways that currently 80% of the industry isn't even measuring that kind of thing. So, speaking of client feedback, so we'll switch from kind of proposals and pursuit to now we'll talk about more like business development, especially thinking about seller doers. A lot of firms have the seller doer model. The majority of the industry does, even those with full-time BD staff, they still are just sort of supportive or supplemental to those seller doers. So how do you get a seller doer to get more work? Obviously, as Rohan mentioned earlier, repeat business. It's cheaper and it's easier to get business from your existing clients. It's also easier to get a new client from a referral from an existing client. So, one of the ways that insights can help that is if you are actually measuring things like Net Promoter regularly, not just every 5 years in your perception study, but literally like on an ongoing basis. At the end of a project, you're asking that question. Understand who your net promoters are. Those are the nines and the tens on that scale. Now you have literally a hot and warm list of leads that seller doers can reach out to and say, "Hey, I'm so glad that you were pleased with the work that we did on this last project. You can understand more about what it was that was so exceptional, and then it becomes a conversation of, who else do you know that would benefit from our services?" It's a large org. It could be someone in their org in another region. If it's a municipal public works director, well, guess what? They are probably friends with some public works directors in other counties, in other cities, in other states, and they'd be willing to give a referral. So that becomes really a really huge factor. And as I mentioned earlier with that one example, detractors and passives, maybe you're leveraging that information as part of your pursuit strategy. If there's a detractor in that organization, what can you do proactively to address it with that detractor before the RFP comes out, before the proposal is submitted, before the interview takes place? How can you shore up that relationship? But you have to measure it in order to be able to get those insights. And so that's one way that I think you can be on point in your seller doer business development activities. Rohan.
Yeah, and I'm trying really hard, by the way, to not use AI as much as I can, but I can't stop. And that's where, look, again, the insights come into the play, right? Typically, when we are going after the project, we all know who's going to be on the committee. We know who, the decision maker, the buyer is going to be. We know the influencers in the process. If you're a GC or an engineering firm, we know what architectural firm might be involved in the process and what kind of feedback they might give, what kind of relationship we might have. And one of the things that has been fascinating for me lately is being able to build on-point personas that we can essentially understand. Like, okay, we have Tim on the decision-making committee, and Tim has been focused on 1, 2, 3, 4 in the past, and da da da. You can actually start meshing the insights that we have into building that persona and start building the messaging to essentially deliver the entire strategy around what needs to happen to win the project. Understanding the historic data, weave it back into the messaging strategy. And then another thing that I found fascinating recently is, can you actually start benchmarking your past proposal data? Can you actually start driving insights around like, hey, what have you been selling to this company in the past like 5 years? What's our messaging? And understand that to start, and then start building on top of the strategy, that exact strategy, and make it even better. So again, it's a feedback loop that we continuously keep on building ourselves without thinking about it much. But then if you can start adding more insights to that process, the loop becomes even more stronger as we start going down the road.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about projects. We're going to talk about it a little bit more. I mean, at the end of the day, folks, like projects, that's your product, right? That your projects are everything that you sell. I know sell's a bad word sometimes in the industry, but it's really not. So I'm going to use it here. It's ultimately what your firm's selling, right? So, it's important that you actually are capturing data around it beyond, again, financial performance is an important thing to measure. What was your profitability? What was utilization? What were, all of those things. Was the project successful from the client's perspective, obviously? But then also, like, what was that client's experience? So, understanding what those satisfaction scores are, taking data and understanding like the experience and sort of how well you met or exceeded or fell short of expectations. Net promoter score isn't the be all end all, but it's a really helpful way to know, like, did we create a promoter or a detractor, or we have someone that's kind of lukewarm in the middle? And then obviously, like, what can we learn? Um, from that, what's there in the actual comments? Like, what are we picking up on through the feedback that they've given us? And obviously, anything you do in a digital survey, that's not where it should stay. It should be now a tool that project managers and leaders use to inform those conversations that you're having from a relationship standpoint, but also now it becomes a tool that you can leverage because every firm says they're client centric, they're client first. We all know this. It's something that every firm says, but very few firms actually back that claim up. And I think we can learn so much from the retail and consumer world. Yes, a lot of it is not applicable, but if you've heard me speak in S&PS circles for years, I get on that soapbox of like, there's so much we can learn from out of our industry and find a way to engineer it, if you will, for our industry to be successful. And, think about the way we all make purchases. We read reviews. We look, I literally just hired a new pest control person because my contract expired with a big box. And I'm like, man, I want a better experience. I want more hands-on. Guess what? I went with the guy with the 5-star Google review and I read about 40 of their 400 Google reviews. And I said, this is the person that I want to hire to come on. Guess what? Your clients are increasingly thinking just like that. So I think leading firms are proactively positioning their firm as client centric and as delivering an exceptional experience, not just by saying that you do, but actually by leveraging the data and the insights from all that you've collected to demonstrate that your firm really is client centric. And that's definitely where we're headed. We're moving much more towards that consumer mentality because guess what? Every one of your clients are consumers too. And increasingly they are younger and different generations where all they've ever known is this whole ratings and feedback sort of environment, the experience economy, and that's exactly how they're going about selecting firms moving forward. So, moving away from proposals and business development and client feedback and things like that, let's just talk about some other marketing metrics. The digital environment. There is a treasure trove of information that your website can be, should be, might be, maybe not capturing, right? Rohan mentioned a couple. Like, do you know who's visiting your website? Do you know what content they're looking at? What pages, what articles, what links they're clicking, how long they're on the site, what companies they are, even what individuals they are? There's software that can tell you all of that. You just have to have it, you have to use it. I know a lot of firms that have it, but they're not leveraging it. And Rohan shared a really great example. Like, imagine you're a seller doer or a business development person, and you're about to go into a meeting and like what their digital footprint has been like in the last 30 days. Hey, they were on our website 3 different times. Here's what they were looking at. Oh, interesting. They read that article and that article. That might be something that I need to probe on. Your people don't go in and say, "Hey, I saw you on our website." No, but now you can better understand the things that they're interested in. So you can ask some informed questions to get more of the types of answers that you want. Again, personalization. It's all about personalization. And so I think marketers in general, we're just like I said earlier, we're at that like data, maybe information level, but we're not consistently making the jump to taking that and leveraging it into real insights. And a lot of that is we're either not tracking it or it's just sort of dispersed across so many places and we can't get our hands on all of it at once, so we're not able to sort of leverage that. Rohan.
Well, it's fun. So Tim mentioned digital footprint, right? We have people, we can figure out people reading certain content and so on. One of the things I personally have experienced is we, as an industry, we do a really good job on the front, but then a lot of times we don't really drive a lot of outcomes from our perspective when it comes to selling our experience outside proposals, right? So as we're executing the projects, we're learning about a lot of challenges, solving a lot of problems, so, creating amazing case studies for ourselves, and what are we doing to sell them better? Proposals, of course, is the best way to sell it because it can tangibly give us outcomes to win more work. But at the same time, there are a lot of different dimensions that we're not thinking about, right? Understanding the challenges that a client might have or the solution that our team might come up on a project and building up a blog post and putting that blog post thought leadership article on the website, promoting that through social media, and essentially creating the content, the thought leadership articles outside the proposal world is super important, which will essentially start contributing like one by one as you go towards the broader messaging strategy that you have. Again, it's really important to collect those lessons, collect those instances from the projects as we're executing because it's in people's heads that need to come out so you can actually not just sell it in one place, but sell it on multiple channels and build a strength around those channels to come back into the strategy. And again, tying it back to the system of record is, like Tim mentioned, always a challenge for most of the firms right now. I've seen countless number of firms recently that are like, hey, we're looking to buying a new CRM. But at the end of the day, it's about like process, not the system. Tools can come and go, but if you don't have a process that essentially, really solid from the get-go, the tools are not going to matter, right? So regardless of how many CRMs you change, your process is going to be the same. What's the point, right? So again, setting up really good processes and communicating those and training those and evaluating those and having good frameworks around it is very important as we go think about looping data back into the marketing.
Yeah, and so I've already talked about this, so we won't stay here long, but you want a real life AEC example of what it looks like to leverage insights and use it to proactively communicate your value proposition, to predict future success from past success. This is a great example. SME, they're a client of ours at Client Savvy. They do a great job on their website. They have a client experience page. They tell the story of their client experience commitment and they back it up with scores. They back it up with their ratings in areas that matter. They talk about their net promoter score. They have quotes from real, actual named clients, and this definitely helps them, position themselves as sort of that luxury brand, if you will, because they're actually backing up all their claims with real data. So, all right, Rohan's going to talk to us a little bit about how we can leverage technology and partnerships in order to maximize these insights.
Thank you, Tim. So at the end of the day, our industry is all about partnerships, right? And that's where folks like Client Savvy and Clearly Rated and Joist AI come in picture. Like we believe in partnership day in day out. And I wanted to take a step back for this section and essentially give you a little bit more insight into like how to think about innovation and technology that's evolving right now. So if you know this diagram, Gartner essentially does this research every single year and have a lot of research publication that they put out in the market to talk about where do they see things happening. And the typical way to read this is everything that's on the top of the curve is something that's essentially getting like through a maturity process and then going into infrastructure building and then going into a next step of maturity in general. And if you think about AI, like where we are with AI right now, the agentic AI is something that we have been hearing a lot lately, because the understanding of those is coming to a maturity to point that it's going to be mass implemented. The funny part is I just read an article from Forbes the other day where they're saying 95% of the pilots with AI are failing. So we are going through a thought of through the disillusionment process right now, and then we'll go into another slope upwards as we go down from there. And that's basically every single time new tech, new system comes in to action, that happens regardless. It happened with email, it happened with cloud, it happened with a lot of different examples, and the same thing is happening with AI as well. So that's something, marketers I feel should keep a close eye on is how what are the things that are coming down the line, what are the things at the top of the curve, what are the things that are going to the slope and then trend up. That gives you a good understanding about where to build technology, incorporate those tools in the day-to-day workflows. The next slide essentially is focused on marketing, right? If you think about different steps of marketing like outside AEC. There's a lot of like personalization has been proven method, and there are a lot of tools around personalization that happens right now. Like customer journey analytics has been one of the big priorities lately. That's actually going to the downhill slope, and they'll start coming upwards. Generative AI for marketing is the hot topic right now, which is why it's at the peak. But then it's going to go to the slope and then go back up again, which is a phenomenal framework to think about how tools and technology evolve in our industry. And if you think about AEC in general, we are a little behind from the tech curve. So whatever is the bottom of the slope is something that's actually might be on the top of the curve for a lot of companies as well. Um, Another thing to think about, like, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides because we have a fun part towards the end from what perspective. But when you're actually thinking about selecting tools and processes, one of the frameworks that I've always enjoyed following is PAX framework, which essentially anchors around problem. Like we have to always think about problems because at the end of the day, we are AEC industry, and a lot of us as engineers, and we have engineers in the leadership position because engineers by default go towards solution and then think of problem as a second thing. But we have to have a problem first mentality that essentially and drive the conversations around problem, which in my opinion drives the best ROI situation for us at the end of the day. The next slide essentially is a slide focused on partnership, and that's something I like a mindset I've brought as we're building Joist AI, for example, is the design build mentality. If you think about design build project delivery method, the maximum impact in the process can happen in the early days of the project when you're actually designing things. Because when you go into construction phase, changing the designs are very expensive because of course there are a lot of resources and costs associated with it. And that's the same concept from a software building perspective, which is why we spend a lot of time with customers to talk about, hey, what does it mean for you? How can we improve this? What else do you need? And keep designing and anchoring our conversation there, so we can actually make a maximum impact for our customers as we go down the process for them. And a good example of that is something that we heard from a lot of our customers lately is, hey, we have all these proposals that we're sending from our out of the company across different regions, different offices, but we don't know what we're talking about in those proposals. So we took that challenge from a lot of leadership and essentially came up with a dashboard that can essentially extract the insights from those proposals from just like the unstructured data and start essentially communicating on, hey, this is what you should do as a company to strengthen your brand positioning. This is what you should do to address the gaps you have in the messaging. Hey, this is what you should do to capitalize better on market opportunities, and so on. So all these insights are drawn from hundreds of proposals that are essentially going through the system because a lot of our VPs and directors wanted to hear about the themes and alignment across different regions. But we took that challenge and built it for them. And that's a really good example on how feedback from software perspective can do amazing things for us that are more practical and could not happen in the past because AI wasn't there. Um, the last part, I'll let Tim take the last slide after this on how we can essentially leverage tech to turn data into actionable insights.
Yeah, so, integrations, think about your marketing software, your technology. The best way to think of it is like we call it a tech stack. And then so instead of a bunch of disparate, separate platforms, you think about like how can we bring all of those things together so that they all talk to one another, they all work well together. And that's really where integrations come in. Proactive intelligence, it helps with that messaging, it helps unify the experience, and ultimately it helps you drive those strategies together. And that's kind of how Rohan and I came together for this presentation. We have a lot of clients in common at Client Savvy and Joist AI, and we realized through conversation, like, wow, wouldn't it be powerful if our two platforms talk to one another? If our clients could leverage client sentiment data, client feedback data, past project data inside of the Joist environment to be able to maximize that data point in order to make their efforts a lot more powerful and ultimately to win more work. So I'm going to let Rohan talk a little bit about what that integration looks like and how it works, how it's a benefit to our clients.
Thanks, Tim. To Tim's point, like we took that opportunity and essentially took it to a whole different level. So if you look at on the screen, what's happening right now is the Joist AI chatbot essentially is looking into client savvy data. And the question asked is like, what are the themes from client feedback in the last 12 months? If you think about it, it's a pretty loaded question, right? There are so many dimensions to this question. Like you'll have to go through every single feedback that you heard, read through that in last 12 months and understand what the themes are in that feedback and start aggregating that information. It might take hours to really pull that together, right? Whereas a chatbot can query the database pretty quickly and then give you the insight off the bat immediately, which essentially changes the game, right? If you think about the tool set that we have, the tools that we're using across the board, and if you start, combining the tools to really start driving the actions, the insights, how magical would it be for us when we're actually going through the pursuit process? That essentially is the message: is if you can start bringing the data together in one place and start leveraging that to drive insight, it's actually going to make us far more efficient as we go. And Tim has some example that I'm actually pretty, excited about to talk.
Yeah, so one of our joint clients, Park Hill, down in Texas, these are real use case examples that their team found. It would be really powerful if we could run a prompt that would pull the most recent positive feedback about insert category of work and weave it into a client specific cover letter for this project and this client for this particular proposal, right? Or analyze feedback from this particular client and recommend 3 bullet points for why choose us section of a proposal. I won't read all of them. You get the point. But the idea is that it's not just the broad, like the example Rohan shared is good and it's broad, but we're talking about the ability to get incredibly granular and then in a matter of seconds be able to pull that insight out of one software platform, pull it into another software platform, and then be able to use that in creating ultimately a proposal, a qualifications, whatever it may be. And that's where this idea of integrations are really powerful when two systems and more systems are able to talk to one another. So Chance runs the CX program over there at Park Hill. This was his quote that he gave us. He's super excited. They're super excited about what this partnership means for them and what this integration will mean for them in their pursuits. And so, it really becomes, again, another way to just leverage more of your technology stack to ultimately make the process of drawing insights and then leveraging those insights to make it a lot easier. So, we're wrapping up and we'll have a couple minutes for some Q&A. If you have any questions, start entering them now into the chat window. What are some of these key takeaways? So I think stop relying on gut instinct and guesswork. There's too much data available already, or there's too much data that you can be capturing. You need to actually use data and insights to be your competitive advantage. Think about data across all the customer journey. It's not just about proposals. It's not just about client feedback and project performance. It's about all of those other marketing touch points as well. Are you capturing it? Are you leveraging it? Of course, AI is nothing to be afraid of. It's here. It's not going anywhere. It's either you're going to learn how to use it the right way or you're going to be left behind. So, how can you leverage AI? How can you leverage technology? How do you leverage partnerships and integration? And then I think the last point is really considering that account-based approach, like really getting granular and thinking about every client, every pursuit through the lens of having a strategy, a game plan for that particular client. So with that, we will open up for questions. We've got just on time. We've got 5 minutes here to answer any questions you might have. Rohan, anything else to add here?
No, this was actually a pretty awesome session. So thank you for, I learned a few things from you today as well. So
Yeah, awesome. Any questions? Well, definitely, you've got our information here. If you have questions, if you have anything about Joist or Client Savvy or anything in general, please let us know. Reach out to us, connect to us on LinkedIn, send us an email. Love to talk to you, love to answer your questions. I think Rohan and I all geek out on this sort of thing. So we're always happy to share our insights and our thoughts with you as well. Um, Appreciate you all for coming to the webinar today. As we mentioned, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar, so be on the lookout for that. And there's a bunch of folks that didn't make it, they'll get it in their inbox as well. So if you have any colleagues that signed up with you that didn't make it, they will get an email with the recording as well. So that's all for me. Rohan, any parting words from you?
no, all good. Excited and thank you again for everyone's time.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Hope you all have a wonderful day and stay tuned for our next webinar at Clearly Rated and Client Savvy. Look forward to seeing you soon.
You got it.
Take
Thank
care.